Welcome, everybody. How's it going? I'm Derek Fossbender. I'm here with the B&H event space, virtually, of course, sitting in my very humble Bronx abode. Tonight, we have a wonderful photographer who actually started his learning process in the B&H event space, Esteban Gil. So tonight, Esteban's going to be talking about using high-speed sync for dramatic portraits. I know he's got a lot of information. He is an amazing photographer. So Esteban, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I'm going to kick everything over to you.
Great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks for all of you guys that tuned in. I see that there's a ton of people jumping in now, so I'm going to get right to it because there is a lot of information and I want to make sure that we're not late. So let me just share my screen. I'll tell you guys a little bit about myself. First of all, thank you, Derek. Thank you to B&H for everybody that asked me to be on this. I know that it's kind of weird, uncharted times right now, and we're trying to just get through this as smoothly as possible. And I really appreciate some of the bigger brands like B&H that are putting people together and that are focusing on the educational part of our industry, which is something that I feel very passionate about. So I love that you guys are putting this together, and I hope it's not I know it's not the first time. I know it's not going to be the last time. So I really appreciate you guys putting this together. So I'm just going to jump in and share my screen so that we can get started with the presentation. So one of the things most of the things that I like to teach is more of a shooting cinematic style. I love doing this with very minimal equipment. When you think of off-camera flash, you think of something where you're going to be overwhelmed by equipment, you're going to be overwhelmed by a ton of bags, and you're going to have extra 2-3 bags that you're going to have to carry around a wedding. And that's something that I really dreaded at the beginning of my career. So I really focus on really being or excelling at just using one light. So that's typically what I choose, is just being able to control light, being able to use it in a way that is still creative while having minimal equipment. So, and again, if you guys have not followed me on Instagram, my Instagram is egilphoto. I do run an educational workshop, a company that's called Steel and Flint Society. We have a really engaged Facebook group. So if you guys have not joined the group, I would love for you guys to jump in there and participate. We have a lot of stuff. We have challenges. We have a ton of stuff going on. So if you guys aren't in there, I would love for you to see you guys in there. So obviously, thank you to B&H for having me. And then some of our other sponsors, which are Magmod, which is a brand that I absolutely love and absolutely believe in. And then Hofest Leather Goods, which again is another one of my sponsors, and they carry a lot of like the straps and all of this leather stuff, which is just some awesome equipment that you guys also carry at B&H. So let's get started. So the first thing that I want to talk about is equipment. I do talk about the equipment that I use. I know that I get these questions a lot. I constantly get DMs asking what equipment I use, what am I going to use, what I've used in the past. But right now, what I'm using, the equipment that I use the most right now, as far as a modifier, is a mag box. This is all I use as far as modifiers. I'm not using any multiple lights. I'm just using the mag box. It's very convenient to carry around. It's very easy to put together. I mean, as a matter of fact, you can put it together in about 30 seconds. All you have to do is just pop this in, wait until it pops, put the baffle on, and then you're good to go. So mag box is what I typically recommend as far as a modifier. So just go back to sharing my screen here. I also use a Godox V860 Mark II, which is probably the most popular flash. This is a very affordable flash in comparison to some of the first party flashes, and it's a very good starter flash. If you want one that's a little bit more advanced, the V1 would be the equivalent of that, which has a little bit more power. And then my favorite light is actually the AD200, which is the equivalent of about 3 standard flashes, and as far as power goes. So And then if you want something that really, where you're trying to overpower the sun, or you're trying to do something where it requires a lot of power, that would be the AD600, which is about an equivalent of 3 of the AD200s. As far as triggers, I use an Godox Pro trigger, and they're great. They're very versatile. They're super easy to use. Just the overall family of the Godox brand is great, um, paired up with the MacBook. So, all right, let's go to our next slide. And I'm just going to very quickly go through some of the tips and a lot of the things that a lot of people tend to not get wrong, but get confused on. When somebody first starts off with off-camera flash, the most overwhelming feeling is always, well, I gotta get my settings in camera. I don't know what certain things do. And the first step to working with off-camera flash is always no off-camera flash. So you want to get your ambient light in camera, and then you introduce your flash. So you want to work in steps. You want to work in layers. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to get your ambient light in camera, and then you want to introduce your flash. So if I go back to my first slide here, if you see this young lady here, she is the light that is falling on her is specifically coming from my flash. So my first test shot would have been taken without a flash on to get my ambient light. So if you look at the settings here, it was shot with an 85 millimeter. Is at 1/1000th of a second, wide open. I love to shoot wide open, and at a low ISO to prevent any noise coming from the sensor. So I would take a test shot without the flash on, which you'll see later on in the presentation. And then once I have my ambient light corrected, all I'm going to do is just turn on my flash, introduce my flash, and then that's what's going to be lighting the subject. So ambient light isn't really going to affect the subject too much, because that's what the flash is there to do, along with the Magbox. When you go back, when you look at that image that I just showed, the shutter speed is what is going to control your ambient light. So shooting in a darker cinematic style, you're going to want to really play with your shutter speed. So we'll talk about the ability of working with something like high-speed sync in a little bit, and that's what allows you to go past the camera's sync speed. So the higher the shutter speed on your camera, the darker your ambient light will be. So typically, I'm going back to this image here, this shot here, it looks a little bit darker because of the fact that I'm at a higher shutter speed. So being at a higher shutter speed darkens my ambient light. If you were to just look at this scene without looking at this image, it would be much brighter. So what I'm doing is I'm controlling my ambient light through my shutter speed. So, and I want to underexpose, but usually typically I want to underexpose my ambient light by about 1 to 3 stops. And one of the most important things that comes with shooting off-camera flash, one of the things that you want to know is that the closer that your light is to your subject, the softer your light is going to look. So you want to ensure that if you want a nice soft light falling onto your subject, you're going to want to make sure that that light is closer to your subject. So, and we'll show you guys some behind the scenes shots in a little bit where it'll show you some of the examples of how close that light should be. So, and then the biggest that I've used in my work has been high-speed sync. And that's the ability to use flash at a shutter speed that's higher than what your camera allows it to be. So if anybody's ever used off-camera flash and they've tried to go up in their shutter speed and they get stuck at 250th, and some Canons it might be 200 or 160, that means that it's limited. It's limiting the flash to only being able to fire at a certain shutter speed. So what you want to do is on most cameras, as long as you're using a system that's compatible with high-speed sync, you want to make sure that you have that turned on so that it allows your camera to go up to 1/8000th of a second. So this, going back to what I just talked about, being that the higher the shutter speed, the darker your ambient light is going to look. If you look at this image of these rings and these shoes, that stuff behind the shoes, the darkness of the shoes, isn't photoshopped. This isn't something that I added in post. This is specifically coming through my shutter speed. So if you look at this image here, this is actually what it looked like on the left. So when you look at the image on the left, and I always talk about this, when I talk about this image on the left, I always like to talk about it as like, I'm just like every other wedding photographer. I come in and sometimes it's not the most ideal settings. Sometimes it's not the prettiest places. So you kind of have to work with whatever you're given. And as wedding photographers, I feel like we need to run into that a lot. And we have to kind of adjust to working with certain situations. And this was a situation where the background wasn't necessarily the most pleasing. So what I did is I used high-speed sync in order to really delete the background of the image. And this is the result on the right. So, and this was shot at 1/5000th of a second. Again, the shutter speed is so high because it's really trying to eliminate the ambient light. If I were to take a test shot without my flash on here, the image would be completely dark, and that's what I want. So any of the light that you see on this image is specifically coming from my mag box. So you don't see any ambient light in here. Everything that you see is coming from an 8200 and a mag box. And as far as light placement, I'm directly on top of the shoes. The softbox is directly on top of the shoes in order to create that reflection there. And I'm very close to my subject because I want that nice soft light. And I don't need to, since I'm so close to my subject, I don't really need to be at a high power. So if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, that's showing that I am at 1/128th power. So it doesn't require that much power.
Esteban, real quick, we had a question come in from Facebook on EFCS. If you shut it off, and if you can go over a little bit, just real quick about what EFCS is. So we're talking about electronic front curtain shutter.
Front curtain. I do. I shoot with DSLRs, and the only mirrorless camera that I shoot with is my my GFX 50S, and then my X Pro 3. But typically, I know that if you have a lot of, I think it's incandescent lights or any overhead lights in a lot of these wedding venues, then you should be turning it off because it does give it a little bit of a weird effect. But I typically will turn it off in order to prevent anything like that from happening. So,
and just to piggyback real quick while we have you answering questions, Douglas asked, how do you calculate your flash power when you're using high-speed sync? Is there a formula that you use that kind of limits having to chimp it or get you in the ballpark?
Yeah, so there's two rules that I go over when it comes to flash power. You're never going to really know unless you have a meter with you. You're never going to really know exactly what power you should be starting at. So there's two rules that I go by. If I'm taking a portrait of someone, I want to start at 1/32nd power. And the reason why I do 1/32nd power is because that is the closest to the midway point of my power range on my flash. So I won't have to travel too much if I have to go up or down in power. And then if I'm shooting details, since I'm so close to my subject and my details that I'm shooting, I'm only going to be required to shoot at 1/128th or 1/64th power. So details, I'm really low power because I'm so close. When I'm shooting a portrait, like for example, this beautiful bride here, I'm typically at 1/32nd power. So good question though. And then just going back to this image here, we're talking portraits. Again, I'm at 1/1000th of a second. I'm at f1.8. When you're dealing with aperture, I like to look at my aperture as specifically my depth of field. I want to base my aperture around what I want my image to look like as far as depth of field. So if I'm shooting with with an 85 millimeter, I typically will like to shoot anywhere from f1.4 to f2.0 because I like the separation. So since I am at that aperture, I'm letting in a lot of light into my sensor. So it's requiring me to balance out my other settings in order to get an even exposure. So since I have such a wide aperture, I'm going to have to go up in my shutter speed in order to really darken out that ambient light by 1 to 3 stops. So that's why it requires me to shoot at high speed sync, because if I didn't have high speed sync, I would be limited to about 250th of a second, and I wouldn't be able to shoot wide open. So, and then this is the final image for this portrait. This was shot with a 45 millimeter tilt shift. I'm sorry, no, with a 35 millimeter Sigma Art. And again, I want you guys to pay attention to how close my second shooter is to the subject here, because I still want that nice soft light. I want to make sure that the direction of light is really being controlled. If you actually pay attention, a lot of photographers will shoot with the flash a little bit more in front of the subject. In a situation like this would actually be detrimental to the shot, because of the fact that if you're pointed more towards the center of her face, there's going to be a lot more light spill on behind her. So being close allows you to control your light even more. And then the final image is this. So this one required a little bit of photoshopping, where I needed to bring the original image into Photoshop, create a duplicate layer, and then flip it, and then mask the left side onto the right side. But typically what I would do, I'll show you guys a little bit later on, is that I would do what I call a two-shot technique. So I would take an original image without my assistant, and then I would take the image with the flash, and then I would composite my assistant out of the image. So this is a very quick portrait. Again, really high power, close to being wide open. I'm at a low ISO. And again, I'm at a really low flash power. So I'm so close to my subject. The image that you see on the left here is the straight out of camera. And then the image on the right is after I've edited the image. A lot of the smoke that you see, a lot of people ask me about the smoke on the top left-hand corner of the image. And that's actually something that I was able to bring out with a brush. That's not composited, it's not photoshopped into the image. That's actually in the image on the left. It's just brought out with a brush. But again, it carries the same rule. There's actually two lights at play here. The videographer, Mark, actually was able to turn on one of his LED panels to kind of give him a little bit more of a not so much of a split lighting, which would really darken out his left side. So we were able to pop a little bit more light on his left side to create a more even feel. So, but again, high speed sync allows me to really darken everything out. And what I'm thinking in my head when I'm taking a shot like this is to ensure that the only light that's being affected, or the only light that's in the shot when you look at my images, or most of my images, are the ones coming from the softbox that I'm using, my Macbox. Softbox as ambient. So this is a cool technique that I use a lot. And this is something where I'll take my Macbox and I'll place my couple, whether it's forehead to forehead, and I'll put the softbox directly behind them. And I'll actually, what you see behind the subject here, the couple, is actually my Macbox. So I'm using my Macbox as the ambient light. But I'm still at a higher shutter speed to create that moody look, to create that drama that's coming out of the images. So it's a very simple technique to do. All you have to do is just get them close enough to each other, which typically on a wedding day is not the hardest thing to do, especially for a newly married couple. And then just use your softbox, get it really close, almost as if you were shooting the details. Get it really close to your subject, put it behind them, and then just shoot directly into the softbox to create this really dramatic, this really beautiful, elegant silhouette. And then if you move a little bit over, get a little bit of a better angle, you can get a shot like this. So very simple technique, and it works very well, and clients typically love it. So when you're thinking of shooting with only one light, I do like to use a two-shot technique, which is something that's going to resemble the use of multiple lights. So this specific shot, I'm shooting at 1/4000th of a second. I'm wide open. This is on the GFX 50S. I'm at a low ISO. I'm sorry, I think that should be 160 ISO, which is a native ISO. I'm at 1/32. So if I'm taking an image of two people and I want to light them or make it look as if I was shooting with two different lights, do is I'll actually light them individually. Then I'll take both images into Photoshop. I'll edit it in Lightroom. Once I'm done editing them, I'll take them into Photoshop as layers. And then one of the best things that you can learn from Photoshop when you're doing a technique like this is called uh, auto align layers. If you go to edit, select both layers, go to edit, and then go to auto align layers. Photoshop will actually take care of aligning both layers for you, and you don't need a tripod. I'm actually going to show you guys a composite that I shot, which is 9 different images, and I didn't use a tripod at all because it's not required. A lot of people, when they think of composites or compositing things out, they automatically go to, well, I'm going to use a tripod, and it's not required at all because Photoshop is so smart. So,
Esteban, we had a couple questions come in from Facebook, so if we could just take a quick minute to answer some of those. We have a question: would using a grid, will that affect the softness that you wish to have? So if you could just give a quick answer on your use of a grid, do you use it and why?
I do not use a grid, and because of exactly why that question was asked, because it does affect the harshness of the image. So the harshness of the light falling onto your subject. So I like softboxes because, I mean, ultimately it comes down to physics. So the larger the light source, the softer the light is going to look. I love a soft look. Some people are into the grids. Some people are into taking a mag sphere and adding a grid under it to create a very directional look while still attempting to have that softer look. But it's not going to look like a softbox. In my opinion, if you use a softbox, even if it's a smaller softbox like the Mag Box, which is a 24-inch softbox, it still is significantly softer than a grid. So,
okay. Now, playing off of that, we had somebody ask if you're worried about when you're shooting wide open, are you worried about catching your focus point? You know, you're working with a razor thin focusing plane. Are you worried about the picture falling out of focus if there's any slight movement?
I was worried about my photos being in focus when I first started shooting photography. And one of the most important things that I've learned throughout my career is that your couples aren't going to necessarily care about your shots being slightly out of focus. The people that are most concerned about the technical aspects of our photography are typically other photographers. And I think you just kind of have to actually, most of my shots, most of the work that I'm creating is shot manually focusing. So it's shot with a medium format sensor, manually focused, wide open. So when I tell people that, they're like, "You're insane! Like you're gonna most of your stuff is gonna be out of focus," and you get used to it. I mean, focus peaking is super important. Being able to zoom in, having an EVF, these are things that technology has given us that allows us to kind of work in an easier way, and it makes our jobs a little bit easier. But yes, you would be surprised how many shots I hand in throughout a wedding gallery that are slightly out of focus. And to me, at the end of the day, if there's essence to the image, if there's storytelling to the image, which are far more important than the technical aspects of the image, then I think that image is going to make it into the gallery, regardless of whether it's a little bit out of focus or not. But it is a valid concern. So.
Now, as far as your technique on the two-shot composites, is that a go-to? What percentage is that? More just for some of these staged, very elegant, romantic portraits where you use that two-shot technique?
Yes. Yeah. So if you were to look at a gallery of mine, you would probably be surprised how much I don't use off-camera flash. So at the end of the day, I'm a natural light photographer. You should be a natural light photographer before you kind of graduate into that off-camera flash. I see a lot of photographers forcing off-camera flash and really forcing it throughout the entire day. The best thing that you can do for your photography is not necessarily focusing so much on off-camera flash, but focusing on really being able to read natural light. Once you are able to read natural light, then you can graduate into using off-camera flash. You can graduate into using off-camera flash in a creative manner. I just think that's way more important. So as far as how many times a day I'm doing these types of shots, out of a gallery, you'll probably, out of a gallery of anywhere from 500 to 700 images, I mean, a good portion of them are reception images, which are using off-camera flash. But as far as portraits, I'll probably have like 20 to 30 images that are specifically done with that same cinematic off-camera flash look. Now, not to say that I don't take that into consideration when shooting with natural light. When I'm shooting with natural light, I'm always looking for shadows and looking for contrast in my images. I'm not running away from harsh light. I usually embrace it a little bit more so that it can be more cohesive when you look at a shot like that when it's next to a shot that's shot with off-camera flash. So. All right, so we talked about the two-shot technique, and we talked about how I do this. 2 shots, bring them into Photoshop, and make sure that you learn the auto align layer. That's one of the most important things that you can learn when it comes to a shot like this. And again, if you look at the placement of the light, I'm pretty close to the subjects. Trying to keep at the same distance. Obviously, there's a height difference, but it will make make things much easier if you try to keep them within the same distance. And I'm always using an assistant. So this was actually at a workshop that I taught. This is one of our attendees that I made hold the light, but typically this would be the type of shot that I'm using. So, and this is the final image after I put them into Photoshop and I edit everything out. So again, this was bright daylight. This was Arizona, like harsh light. And I'm using my settings to my advantage because I still want to be able to get that look. So high shutter speed, open at a lower ISO, and I'm at somewhat of a high power. So. All right, so I want to talk about this shot here because I really want to focus on the advantages of shooting high-speed sync and shooting in a way that is more of a creative way as opposed to just kind of lighting something up because there's a lack of light. So if you look at this image here, this is a pretty good image. I mean, if we were rushed and we just kind of had to take one quick shot with a softbox. This is with a softbox directly behind us, up high, and just this is a shot that you take because there's a lack of light, probably a lack of time, and to me, it's so much more important for me to give my couples one amazing shot as opposed to a bunch of average images. And that's kind of what's been expected of me from my clientele. That's when somebody meets up with me, they know that they're going to get those images that are really going to stand out. They're going to want to hang up. So this right here was what you would probably typically see when using off-camera flash. And then this is the image that I took in that same exact area, but this is utilizing the techniques that I shoot in. So this is using a high shutter speed to really darken out my ambient light. Directional light is super important. I'm shooting close to wide open. This is with a 24 millimeter Sigma. And what I did here is I actually lit each person individually here. And I had my assistant go to every person and light them individually. And then I composite everything in. So again, no tripod. And I'm going into Photoshop and I'm compositing everything in. I'm aligning all the images through Photoshop. It does it automatically. It very rarely ever fails. And then I'm just masking everyone into the image. So if you look at this image, this is just your average image. If you look at what you can do, if you take your time to learn the technique, this is what you can get as far as that. So there's a really big difference. And this is the type of shot that somebody looks at it and they go, yeah, I'm going to hang this up. I'm going to buy a print of this. I'm going to buy a canvas of this. And it makes a huge difference, not only when I'm showing other photographers, but when I'm showing my couples and they see stuff like this. So this is actually behind the scenes of a type of shot that I do, which is, again, what I just talked about, the composite. So this is what you would see. So you would see for this particular shot, you're looking at 7 images. I start off with the person on the left and I work my way over to the right. Now the person lighting these girls, is my second shooter, Kaylin. So she's the one that's individually lighting up, and I'm kind of instructing her on how close she should be, whether she should be pointing the light differently. But essentially, the main idea here is to light each person individually. Um, this is a 2-row technique, so obviously there's 2 rows of girls here. So I want to make sure that I'm at a narrower aperture. So again, once I change my settings, I have to compensate with other settings. So I like shooting at 1/32 power. So if I'm at f7.1, I'm going to have to bring my shutter speed down. So this is the final image here. So this is after taking each one of the images, and I'm editing each one individually. I'm bringing them into Photoshop as layers, aligning them, and I'm masking each girl into the final image. So again, it's once you try it out, this particular image took me maybe 10 minutes to do. It's very simple to do. It's the only thing that usually stops photographers from being creative is either being scared that something is going to happen, being scared of the fact that it might not come out well, or time. So really being a wedding photographer is about utilizing your time in a way that is going to be beneficial not only to yourself but to your couples too.
And Esteban, are you gelling the flashes here? We had a question come in on if you're matching the ambient light with gels here.
So I hate this question because I never gel my images because I'm running around and I always forget to gel my images, but you should be gelling them. So in a situation like this, it does look pretty close, and that's more that's more to the preset that I'm using. So I'm starting off with small presets, and this particular one just kind of gives it that warmer look. So when the colors are off, it helps it a little bit. So, but no, this particular image was not gelled, but you should be gelling. So there should be doing a correction gel, especially if there's a wide range of color temperature in the image. So. And I think that is it. So just to really go back toward what we were talking about, just really being able to utilize high-speed sync in a way that can darken out. So a lot of the stuff, like if you look at the shot on the bottom right-hand corner, you're looking at a more of a darker ambience, and that's due to the shutter speed being so high up. Especially when it comes to detail shots, you want to make sure that your light is nice and close. You want to make sure that your light is at a lower power since you're so close. If you're shooting macro shots, then you might need to open up that aperture a little bit. Not open up, close down that aperture a little bit to have more in focus. For the shot on the top right-hand corner there, I wanted to make sure that I had enough of an aperture to be able to get the date of the wedding inside the ring without having it fall out of focus. And then again, the one on the left here, the softbox is camera left, right above her. And then again, I'm using my shutter speed at a high enough shutter speed to really show a lot of the mood in the image. So, shot on the left here, you're looking at again just one light. This is with the GFX 50S. This is wide open 1.4. And then I basically just had her look into the light, but off to the side a little bit. And then I love these types of shots of just the bride just kind of looking up into the light because it gives it a really nice mood to the image. And again, I'm playing around with the shutter speed to really balance out my ambient light and making it look the way that I want it to look for my style. So when it comes to reception lighting, that's a little bit trickier because now you're dealing. I love to use my softbox for pretty much everything, so I have my assistant follow me around with the softbox on the dance floor. And one of the questions that I get a lot is, well, isn't it distracting to have somebody following you around with the softbox? And it really isn't. You might feel weird at first, but if you have your assistant with a monopod, and you have them extended out as much as they can, and just kind of have them above the dance floor and following you around. It's usually really simple to do. People don't really notice it. When people are having fun and they're having a blast, they're not going to notice whether it's a flash or a softbox or any type of modifier that's being pointed at them. One of the techniques that a lot of my peers like to use, especially mag mod users, is that thing that I talked about earlier, which is just putting your mag sphere with a grid and then putting that on your flash, and that still gives it a nice soft-ish look, but it's not as obtrusive as you would think a softbox would be. So I'm used to having my softbox out, so it's not really a big deal to me. But I know that it's definitely something that comes up time to time where people are like, well, I mean, do I really want my assistant walking around with a huge softbox? Which, that's just kind of a preference on how you run the day. So and again, I'm using the same techniques. I'm using the top right hand image here, high shutter speed to really darken out the ambient light, and the light that you see here is just specifically just light coming from my softbox. It's not from any ambient light. It's not from the venue, and it gives it a really cohesive look when you're going from your reception images to your portraits to your details. And then the one on the bottom right hand corner, it is this one's kind of the opposite. So this one I really wanted to get that starburst effect on the lights behind the couple. So that requires being able to shoot at like f/16 on certain lenses, f/11 on certain lenses. I know with this lens, with the 24 millimeter, it was f/16. So when you're shooting at f/16, I mean, you're essentially going to be completely dark because you're not letting in much light into your sensor. So you really have to compensate with your flash. So for this one, I was actually obligated to use the AD600, so I could really blast them for this one image of just the first dance. I love to get just the one really cool image of the first dance, and then I'll switch off to a smaller light where I don't necessarily require that much power. So this is 3 lights, so I will use 3 lights from time to time. It really depends on whether I have the time to set up the lights. Most of the time, I don't. I love, especially this last year, I love taking advantage of shooting the cocktail hour. I think cocktail hour is probably one of the most important things when it comes to candid photography and photojournalistic photography. If you actually check out one of my friends' work, her name is Emily Carr, and she's the one that really pushed this on me. She said, "Hey, you should tell people how important it is to shoot cocktail hour." And I'm like, well, most people aren't really into cocktail hour, most photographers. And in reality, when I started really focusing on shooting cocktail hour, it really gave me an appreciation of shooting real moments, candid moments, not pose, not walking up to people and saying, hey, do you guys want to take an image or take a shot? This is typically where you're just kind of walking around very inconspicuous and you're just snapping moments as they're happening. And then that when I got the appreciation of doing that, it transcended into this whole like, well, I need to have this approach throughout the entire wedding day. So my galleries are a very good mixture of emotion, while still using that cinematic lighting, while still really being able to focus on moments, but still being able to give my couples those pose shots that are the wow shots, what we like to call hero shots, the ones that are going to go up on the wall. So really having a cohesive gallery is a matter of really being able to bring in those aspects of photography into the gallery. So
Esteban, we had a question real quick coming from Facebook. Sure. On if you ever changed the zoom of the flash. And I think while we're on that, can you go into a little bit of how you set up your flashes for these dramatic portraits?
Yes. So the only situation where I would change the zoom of the flash is if I'm using during the reception, if I'm using multiple flashes. So for example, the flashes behind the couple, like you see on the bottom right hand corner image, that those are zoomed into 100 or 200 millimeters, I believe. So what that does is essentially it affects the spread of light. So if I'm at the widest zoom, then it'll have a wider spread of light. So I do zoom them into about 200 millimeters. But as far as, I mean, I very rarely. So only other light that I use off camera flash is the AD200, and the AD200 is actually, which is one of the negatives as a light, is actually fixed to 35 millimeters. Um, so unless I'm using an off-camera flash for reception, then I will zoom them in. But other than that, since I'm using the AD200, it's pretty much just fixed at 35 millimeters. I think it's 35. Pretty certain it is. So, and I think that's pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions, I mean, feel free to please reach out to me if you guys want to. If you guys are going to join the group, um, feel free to post in there and ask questions. If you want to post your work, that's something that we encourage all the time. And you can always reach out to me on social media. I'm at Ego Photo on Instagram. And Steel and Flint Society is where we do our workshops. We do a workshop pretty much every month. Unfortunately, right now we've kind of put that on hold, but we do announce a different workshop at every part of the country every single month. So, for example, we've just at the beginning of the year, right before this whole thing happened, we were in Las Vegas and we were in Arizona. So the next, hopefully, once everything gets back to normal, we'll probably be doing workshops in San Diego. We will be in Seattle, Colorado. There's a ton of different cities that we'll be traveling to. So feel free to reach out and join the group and ask any questions if you have any.
That's fine. We have a another question from Facebook. How many 8200s do you use?
That's a good question. So depending on how much light I need, I'll typically only use one, but I do own 3 of them. One of the advantages I'm actually going to get out of this presentation, I'll show you something. One of the advantages of the Magbox is that it comes with this here, and this allows you to put in 2 different AD200s. So if you want to double up your power, you don't necessarily have to go to like an AD600. So if you want 400 watt seconds, you would just double up your AD200s. And one of the best tips that I've gotten from using this is that you can actually, if you're shooting a reception, so if you do any off-camera flash and you're shooting a reception, we've all gone through the situation where our second shooters have interfered with our flashes, and maybe we've had misfires because we're both trying to shoot at the same frequency, at the same channel. So what I typically do is I put 2 AD200s and I'll put my second shooter on one channel and I'll put myself on my own channel so that we're not interfering with each other and we're still utilizing the same type of lighting technique. It's coming from the same place, but we're not interfering with each other. So that's one of the most helpful things that I've heard from using this little tool here that the Magbox comes with. So.
And when it comes to your hero shots, so we had a question about the shots that you're delivering to the couple. Is this something that, as I think we're going to delve a little bit more into your creative process here and your preparation, is this something that you're preparing for based on the venue or for where you're going to be doing the shots? Are you mentally preparing yourself kind of in your head, an idea of what you want to do, if you want to go outside of the box a little more? Or are you do you do a lot of work on the fly?
So most of my work is actually on the fly. I'm not somebody that, this sounds terrible, but I'm not somebody that likes to be prepared. I love the idea of working under pressure. I love the idea of shooting somewhere where I've never shot. Actually starting this year, I mean, obviously with the situation going on, but I don't like to shoot at the same venue more than twice a year. So if I get leads from the same venue for multiple times a year, I will not shoot at the venue because I feel that it messes with my creativity. when people ask me, would you be able to, or do you typically visit venues beforehand? I don't visit any of the venues. I love the idea of walking in and just kind of letting my mind go crazy a little bit. And that's when I work best. Now, it doesn't mean that that's the right way of doing things. It just works best for me in that way. I love being able to just kind of walk around and let my mind go crazy while the pressure of thing is going on. I feel like that's how I work best. But some people, I know a lot of photographers that will visit a venue 2-3 times before the wedding, and they'll have everything planned out. Um, and even though it might not go as planned during the wedding, it just puts them at ease knowing that they visited the venue and that they're aware of it. So I kind of worked a different way where I just kind of play everything by ear. And if I have an opportunity to be creative, then I typically do it. So, but I do like to ensure that I'm giving my couples. I always say that the difference between a good photographer and an amazing photographer is typically only a couple of shots per gallery. So if you look at anybody that's here that's watching this, if you look at each other's galleries, if everything's well exposed, if everything's edited and color corrected correctly, our galleries are probably going to look similar. It's just about the little things that makes us stand out that is going to help us really be able to stand out amongst our peers. And for that, to me, is off-camera flash. To me, that is the emotional aspect of the photography and the storytelling. So I mean, typically 1 or 2 shots that I get them where I get that same technique, where they'll love it, is what I'll do. And no, I mean, I don't usually plan them out. It just kind of comes out of nowhere. So.
Okay, now I have a question coming from me.
Sure.
Now, I shot probably a handful of weddings in my life. I was a horrible wedding photographer. To anybody who's wedding I
Me
shot,
too.
I apologize. If I ever, if I ever charge the mega millions, I will pay to have your weddings reshot because I feel that bad. Now, one of the problems I always found with me personally, and I think probably a lot of people out there can relate because it was like the one thing I stressed about was I found myself caught in that struggle between, I think there's a progression. So everybody starts as a natural light photographer because number one, they don't know how to use flash, and number two, they don't have flash. So it's easier to just bill yourself as a natural light photographer, right? Then you learn flash, and once you learn flash, you use it for everything. And then you hit a point where you know when to use flash and when not to use flash. And that's, I feel like, when you really hit your stride. And some people decide that they're going to use flash for everything because that's their style. And some people are going to use natural light for everything, and that's their style. One of the things I found was the hardest in the beginning, and I think this would help a lot of people who are maybe starting out or maybe can't get over that hump, is any advice you have or your personal experience, because I think your work is phenomenal, and that's why we have you on here, is how do you approach that, when you're in that kind of limbo stage of trying to stay in a creative groove, but I think sometimes you worry about, well, using flash and stopping and setting it up and making sure your settings get right kind of throw you out of your groove. And it's so much easier to just rip and run with natural light and using what ambient light you have. You get where I'm going? Like, how do you still keep your groove, and how do you push past that stage for the people who are kind of stuck, not knowing where they want to go and how to push past that?
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And I 100% still struggle with that. I still think that sometimes I'm shooting and I'm like, well, am I shooting too much flash, or am I really not being able to, am I really not allowing myself to read natural light? I think it really comes down to, really letting yourself kind of go with whatever you feel more comfortable with. Not necessarily where somebody told me that flash is the right way to do things and this is the way I'm going to do it. So again, at the end of the day, no matter whether you push flash or you are shooting flash throughout the entire day, you started off with natural light. So really challenging yourself in a way that it requires you to think a little bit outside the box, whether it's with flash or not, I think is important. And for me, sometimes I'll go into the wedding and I'll say, well, this wedding doesn't seem like it's very it's going to require that much flash. So I'm just going to challenge myself, and I'm going to really utilize the available light. Now, when I talk about available light, I'm not talking about that I'm going to go into a shade and just shoot somebody with flat lighting the entire day. If you're doing that, that's fine, but that's just not the way that I want to shoot my weddings. I'm talking about walking into a room. I'm talking about really you trying to figure out turning off lights in hotel rooms and seeing where the light is falling. If there's harsh shadows, how do I use them creatively in a way that is going to look pleasing to my couples? Really being creative on the go, I think, is just super important. And then if my natural light isn't really working, and then that's when I bring in my flash. But yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to what your wedding looks like, the feel of your wedding. Uh, but I wouldn't say that right now this is a way that I shoot, because everything just kind of changes for pretty much every wedding. I mean, I just shot a wedding at the not end of last year where I walked in and I was like, this is a wedding where I know that it's going to be have to be shot in a way that is not with off camera flash or doing anything that requires me to set anything up. So I'm probably just going to shoot it all in with natural light and just really utilize, because there was a lot of harsh light. I love harsh light. Like I love being able to walk outside. Like even right now, since we're in quarantine, I go out for walks with my kids, and just being able to see shadows and contrasts in just everyday life, I think, is important. And when you get to a point where you walk into a room and you're able to utilize the available light, I think that's much more important than any flash that you can learn. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, breathe. Take a drink there. I think we need to rehash happy hour from earlier. We need to have like a late night happy hour session. Then
Yes.
we could talk, move the situation to something else. But no, I mean, it's a lot of great information. I know I learned a lot. I'm over here taking notes, trying to up my
Nice.
game, even though, I'm a street photographer, but anything, you gave a lot of great information. It was very easy to digest. Thank you all for joining. If anybody wants to, I mean, we still got a couple minutes. If anybody wants to get any questions in, feel free. The floodgates are open. Just shoot a message in the chat there. For those of you that are watching on Facebook, thank you guys all for tuning in. If you guys have any questions as well, that's what Esteban's here for.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
And Esteban, thank you, man. I mean, Esteban, it was funny. A little backstory about how I came to meet Esteban was I was fishing through our event space messages one day, and I saw a message from Esteban that had fallen by the wayside, and I said, let me reach out to this guy. And I reached out. I said, I apologize. I think this fell between the cracks and nobody reached out to you. And I was newer to B&H at the time. And he said, I've learned through the event space. I've been going to the event space and learning through you guys' workshops. And I took a look at his gallery and I'm like, wow. I'm like, damn. I'm like, the event space has been doing its thing. They must have been teaching this guy something. His work is phenomenal. So it was an immediate, I need to have this guy in. We just gelled. And then, we connected on the whole Fujifilm thing. He's been very supportive of the events that we do through B&H, the events that I've hosted personally. So I do want to thank you for that. I think it's a pretty funny story. I still think about it to this day, that it's like, man, that message to all of you out there in Instagram world, that message that is sitting in your inbox that's left on red, it might be the one. So reach out to them.
Yeah, no, you're right, man.
We do
That's how
have
it started.
a couple more questions. How long do you take to deliver photos after a wedding? What's your general turnaround time? Is that something that is promised? Is it contracted, or do you keep enough of a relationship with
So
your
it's
clientele?
I don't have it on my contract. I should, but it's never come up. So if it's during a time where it's not busy, so it really depends on the type of year that I'm having. So for example, 2 years ago, I shot almost 50 weddings. a year ago I shot about 35, and then this year when since I'm focusing more on the educational portion of my business, I'm only shooting 20 weddings, which some have been postponed to 2021, but 20 was the number this year. So if I'm shooting 20 weddings per year, if they're spaced out and I'm not too busy as far as like having back-to-back weddings, my turnaround could be anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. If I was shooting 50 weddings or even 30, 40 weddings, and I have 3 weddings per weekend or anything like that, then you're probably looking at about a month to a month and a half, sometimes 2 months. I think it ultimately comes down to really being able to communicate with your couple. So if you feel that you're almost done with the wedding, or if you have kind of a time frame of when it's going to be, just shoot them a quick email and say, hey, listen, just so you know, I'm working on your wedding and it'll be done by this day. So, but I don't have it in my contract because there is such a wide range depending on how busy I am throughout the year.
Okay. So we had a question. Let's see. Do you deliver all your images on USB to clients, or do you also sell prints? Typically, clients request to have all images on USB.
So that's a good question. I typically, for this year, I started to actually just do digital only. So any of the packages that I sell are just digital. I'm not a very good salesperson. So there's a very weird dynamic between being a salesman and an artist. I'm more of an artist and a really terrible salesman. So I tend to leave that part of the industry to the people that actually know what they're doing. I do sell albums, so my top package is the only package that will come with albums. But as far as prints, I don't have much print sales. I like to make sure that I'm making enough money from my packages, and for most of my packages, I'm including digital files. So, but no USB for this year. I stopped doing that last year. So it's kind of the way that the industry is going. Everything's kind of going in a way that isn't requiring any tangible items. So.
Okay. Now we had a question from Maurizio. The light with the shot with the light behind the couple. So Maurizio, if I'm getting this wrong, I'm guessing you're talking about the dance floor shot with the 2 lights behind.
Unless he's talking about I can pull it up.
The couple shot. Maurizio, I'm gonna unmute you for a second. Hey, Maurizio.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Which exact shot were we talking about here?
The one that has the softbox behind the couple.
This one here?
Yeah, that's one.
Okay.
So this was actually shot with this shot was done with a GFX 50S and a 65 millimeter Midicon. And it's it's like a third party lens, but typically you want to make sure that you're shooting it with a longer focal length so that it compresses the subject, and the softbox will actually look a little bit bigger. If you shoot it with a wider focal length, you're going to get a lot. I mean, the softbox is kind of small, so unless you have a really big softbox, then you're not going to get the entire softbox into it. So you want to make sure that you shoot long focal length, close to wide open, and that compression is going to really make the softbox look somewhat larger within the frame. So usually, like my favorite Nikon lens is actually a 58 millimeter. So typically the 58 is good enough for that, or even an 85. So.
Okay. Perfect. So we are wrapping it up here. Again, I want to thank you, Esteban. This was chock full of information. I think everybody agrees that we really just an excellent delivery, wonderful shots to look at, a ton of information. Again, everybody who is tuned in here live via Zoom, everybody on Facebook, thank you so much for your support. It really does mean a lot to us that we are able to be here with you all, going through this all together, still being able to provide you educational content. 2 weeks ago, nobody knew what Zoom was. There's probably somebody that bought stock in Zoom a couple of weeks ago and they're dancing around the house right now. But honestly, this has just been awesome, that we get to share in really connecting with all of you together. So we want to thank Esteban for all his knowledge tonight. I'm sure if we had everybody unmuted, you'd be getting a standing ovation right now. But we do have a a full lineup tomorrow. We have 3 more events tomorrow, where we're going to be talking about everything from capturing crisis from the eyes of a street photographer who has shot 9/11 all the way up until now with COVID-19. I am co-hosting a photo critique with Shadi, who is lurking somewhere in the participants list right now. So if you don't know him, he has a wonderful body of work. We are going to be critiquing photos live via Zoom tomorrow during our happy hour from 5:30 to 6:30. So if you go onto our Eventbrite page, you can get your answers to how you submit your photos there. And we will be wrapping it up tomorrow at 8 p.m. with another lighting seminar from Sony Artisan of Imagery, Tony Gale, who's going to be talking about beginner lighting and also working with what you have at home. So Esteban, thank you again, man. We're gonna link up.
My pleasure.
Great. We gotta definitely do this again. And thank you all for joining us tonight.